Welcome to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, where we discuss all things political, bringing you the top stories locally, nationally, and from around the world. I'm Ruben Abati, and This Day Live begins now. On Wednesday, October the 20th, many Nigerians, predominantly young people, took to the streets in parts of the country to commemorate the first year anniversary of the famous EndSARS protests, which sought an end to the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, popularly known as SARS, notorious for human rights abuses and extrajudicial killings. In Lagos, youths converged on the Lekki toll gate to mark the anniversary, but suddenly a team of uniformed men led by the police fired tear gas to disperse the crowd. According to the Lagos police chief, those he described as the real protesters had left the scene since 10 a.m. He said those remaining on the streets as at the time of firing the tear gas were hoodlums. Joining us to discuss this and other related issues is Professor Farooq Kperogi, media scholar, public speaker, and newspaper columnist. Good to have you again on This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, Professor Kperogi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Abati.
You're welcome. Thank you. Well, Professor Kperogi, has anything changed? Have we, as a country and as government of Nigeria, learned any lessons from the hashtag EndSARS protest of October 2020, 1 year after?
No, I do not think the government has learned any lessons. And in your review of what happened during the anniversary of the event, you see the same mistakes of the past being repeated. So I would certainly say we have not learned any lessons. We have a government that is very intolerant of the mildest criticisms, a government that has no capacity to tolerate the faintest challenge to its authorities. So we have not learned any lessons, and I don't see this stopping anytime soon.
Well, I mean, but if you listen to Alhaji Lai Muhammad, who gave an address on that day, he said that, look, government is committed to addressing the 545 demand, and that states have been directed to pay compensation to persons who were affected one way or the other. The various state governments, 28 of them, and the Federal Capital Territory, set up judicial panels of inquiry following the recommendation of the National Economic Council, and that the federal government is interested in the outcome of that process. In Lagos State, we have it on good authority that over 400 million have been paid to different persons. Over 267 petitions have been considered. He also pointed out that, look, psychological evaluation, which is demand number 4 on the list of the 545 demand, you know, is being addressed, not just for serving policemen, but also for new recruits. There was also something about government already trying to increase the salary of policemen, address their welfare. Protesters who have been in detention have been released, and all of that. The only thing that Minister Lai Mohammed did not agree with was that anybody died at the Lekki toll gate, particularly in Lagos. He said that was a phantom narrative, and that both Amnesty International and other groups are just promoting fake news. So if you break that down, will you still say that government has not made any effort?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that I've said about this regime is that it perpetually lives in the future. It's always, we will. It's never, we have. It's been a year. A year is enough for us to see manifested, the manifested presence of the kinds of things the city have done. And this is a government that, frankly, I derive no joy in saying this, but it's a government that thrives on bare-faced lies, on, by definition, fake news, propaganda. And it's ironic that the same government whose rhetorical food is propaganda, lies, mind management, you know, likes to label anything that is inconsistent with its propaganda as fake news. I mean, 1 year is long enough for us to see measurable results. It's long enough for people to feel the presence of the policies they say they have implemented in response to the youth-led seismic revolt against police brutality. And all these things we've mentioned that they claim they have done, no one has seen them. So I frankly, it has gotten to a point where people have developed outrage fatigue. And I wrote a column about that. There's an outrage fatigue in Nigeria in ways that I had never seen before. People have become consistently tired with hearing, barefaced, in-your-face lies by this government. And a lot of times they talk in ways, when you listen to Lai Mohammed, it's very obvious he doesn't even believe his own lies, or that if he believes his own lies, he suffers from a psychological ailment and needs help. I mean, this at the drop of a hat, every single thing that comes out of their mouth is, just lies, just barefaced, embellished lies that collide with reality. They seem to live in an alternative universe, and they come up with stories and postulations and lies that just make people scratch their heads. Are these people in our own world? Do they live here? So frankly, Lai Mohammed, unfortunately, he bears a first name that shares uncanny phonemic similarities with Lai. And so it has gotten to a point where people no longer take it seriously. I hope that the government will find someone that can command people's respect, whose words would mean something. But here's a guy who either doesn't believe his own lies or believes his own lies, which is frankly the same thing. I haven't seen anything, and I'm in touch with a lot of young people. The digital economy is what drives the world today. And Nigeria has some of the most innovative, some of the most creative people who design websites, who are experts in search engine optimization, who can compete with the best in the world. And they do this on their mobile devices, which it's a marvel. A lot of us are used to doing things on our computers, on our laptops, or bigger mobile devices. But you see Nigerians on a little mobile device, and on there, they design websites, they create PDFs, Excel spreadsheets, and are participating very actively in the digital economy. Instead of a government to encourage them, as it's been done in India and even in Pakistan, they become targets of police harassment and brutality just because they have a cell phone or are living, fairly wealthy life as a consequence of their insertion into the global digital economy. So this, frankly, gives me a lot of cause for worry.
Well, Farooq Kperogi, I'm tempted to play the devil's advocate. I know it's standard game in Nigeria these days to blame Alhaji Lai Mohammed, the Minister of Information, who in a real sense is just a messenger for the government, relaying the position of the government. If you, and as some other people say, if you insist that nothing has changed, how about that special weapons and tactical team, SWAT, that was set up by the Nigerian government and the disbandment of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad that led to the protest in the first place. So that was replaced with a special weapons and tactical team. And we were told that over 400 policemen were immediately redeployed between October and November 2020, and they had been given the necessary training. What more do you think that needs to be done for Nigerians to say, well, there's been some kind of change? If you are looking for reform, what kind of reform, police reform, will you recommend?
Two things. It's true that Lai Mohammed is just a messenger of the government, but he also brings his own personal disposition to the performance of his government duties. One of those personal dispositions is a compulsive predisposition to lying, outright, barefaced, in your face, condemnable lying. And there's nothing we can do about that. He's not the first Minister of Information we've had, but he's by far the most detestable, the most disreputable we've ever had. So let's get that clear. Second, it is true that something has happened, but what the youth are asking for is some movement, not motions. Motions create the illusion of movement. To create something called SWAT, which is ironic because the SWAT in the United States where I live, which inspired the SWAT in Nigeria, is a brutal force that is used to bring down riots and disruptive elements in society. So that's not a name you should invent to deal with young people, the future of your own country. And frankly, the idea that something has changed since the SWAT, since the NSAS revolt is frankly not true. I'm very deeply inserted in Nigerian online communities, and I deal with a lot of young people. And stories of police brutality, still continue. And, at several places, a lot of young people have died needlessly in the hands of police officers. And so I didn't see what has actually stopped, any change that has occurred in the last few months since the revolt. Like I said, motion is not synonymous with movement. I've not seen a systematic, transaction-oriented, purposeful training and reorientation of the police officers of Nigeria to let them understand that young people with smartphones who have middle-class looks are not necessarily criminals, and that you do not advertise people publicly as criminals when you do not have any evidence against them. So evidence-free victimization of young people whose only crime is that they look well-to-do and have smartphones should be condemned and should be stopped. It hasn't stopped, So I frankly don't, and it goes back to the same distrust of government's narrative, consequent upon, first, the government itself is built on propaganda. It's not prepared for governance. They were really good at opposition, and I'll give that to Lai Mohammed. When he was in the position, he was a very effective spokesperson for the opposition. But they apparently did not know they were going to win the election, so they were not prepared for governance. And so we have the unique situation where you have, in the past, we had governments that were ill-prepared, but this government is unprepared. We have had governments that misgoverned. This government is ungoverning. It's like nothing is actually happening. We have a lot of occasional motions, but barely any movement. And the country will not go anywhere when it doesn't move.
Okay, I'll keep trying to play the devil's advocate. The danger of the single story, the single narrative. I think that's something we need to worry about. Yes, there were young persons, Nigerians, who put out about 1.24 million tweets, on Twitter on October 20 alone. But at the same time, we saw in some other parts of the country, in Abuja, for example, a counter-protest. Young men, led by one gentleman called, I think, Kabiru, I think that's his name, if I got it right, who were saying, look, there was no massacre at Lekki Toll Gate, and that, NSAS is, just fake, and, there's nothing about revolution. These are also Nigerians, and they are Nigerian youths. And then if you look at the complexion of the protest, we seem to have more protests in Abuja and also in the southern part of the country, in some parts in the north, predominantly. Nobody came out to commemorate any memorial. So do we have two kinds of young persons in Nigeria? What do you think is responsible for this difference that was on display?
Of course, it's the manipulation of government. And, that is very apparent. We saw the counter-protesters, many videos fighting over money that government gave them. So this is not a made-up story. There are a lot of videos that have emerged, during NSARS and even the counter-protests. So a lot of these young people are the victims of circumstances. They're manipulated by government, by people in power to counter. And this is a well-worn tactic of oppressors. They try to play one group against the other. It's a tactic our elites have inherited from the colonial overlords that have left since 1960. So, I mean, frankly, the notion that no one died in Lekki is one of the stupidest, excuse the use of this language, psychological manipulations that I've seen. I call it Trumpian gaslighting tactic. You cause people to question their own reality, their own sanity, the perceptual stimuli that they are exposed to. We saw, I stayed here in Atlanta monitoring live feeds of the events that happened in Lekki. And someone came up a few days later to say, no, what I saw did not happen. Premium Times did a very thorough investigation of the deaths and found dead bodies that were thrown in rivers. And they were able to trace those dead bodies after identifying them to people who said they were their relatives who were at Lekki. You know, and this evidence and several other very well-regarded organizations have done investigation and found that people actually did die at Lekki. For anyone to psychologically manipulate people's psyche and say, no, this was all made up stuff. I mean, of course, it's consistent with the regime and its spokesperson, Lai Mohammed, who thrives on outright lies. But it's these are lies taken too far, frankly, because it strikes at the core of the shallowness of our humanity. When we call to question the authenticity, the truth of the death of people, these are human beings. These are the children, daughters of human beings. These are the sons and sisters and cousins of other human beings. They are grieving. They are suffering enormous heartache, you know, as a consequence of the death of their loved ones. But someone sits in the luxury of their office in Abuja and just simply say, no, that's not true. No one died. It's just all made up. And you have real people who have come out to say, I lost my son here. I lost my daughter to this crisis here. And this is documented. There are websites that documented this these deaths, you know, that I monitored. And it caused me to question my own sanity. And that was when I knew I was being gaslit. Gaslighting is a psychological propaganda mind management tool. But they're deploying it so incompetently, and it's so distressing because it's about human lives. It's about death of people, you know. So I wrote an entire column to bring out the evidence of the deaths of people because I was alarmed by the quality of minds of people who were, you know, led to believe government's propaganda. People who initially thought people died and were like, maybe had been deceived into thinking that they actually did kill people. Although I saw gunshots, maybe they were just blank shots. And the government's own narrative about what happened was self-contradictory. At one point, they said it didn't happen. At another point, they say it was just blank shots that were shot. I mean, and the narratives keep changing, and they have no capacity to even reconcile their own narratives about this event. And finally, they say, no, this was all made up. No one died. And frankly, that, for me, a government that is so indifferent, that is so insensitive, that is so casual in lying about the deaths of its own people, frankly, scares the hell out of me. It does.
Okay. Now, when the National Economic Council advised the states to set up panels of inquiry, some states refused, including Jigawa, Yobe, Kebbi, Zamfara, Kano, Jigawa, Borno. They claimed that they had no issue of police brutality in their state. Now, if they had any problem, it was simply a question of insecurity. Now, on the other hand, 28 states and the FCT set up panels, as I said earlier. What's your take on the work of those judicial panels of inquiry? Even if in some states, some suspended sitting, you know, for 6 months. And when it was just a few days to the anniversary, they suddenly woke up again. The most efficient will probably be the panels in Lagos State, Ondo State, and I think Ekiti State, where some compensation had been paid. But what do you think of that in terms of restitution, in terms of trying to address the issues involved?
Well, first of all, I want to address the notion that there's no police brutality in the North. That is demonstrably false. A lot of people have related their problems that they have with police brutality in the North, and it's been all, of course, it doesn't make it to the national media because, as we know, events in the North hardly make it to the media unless they are, momentous. So let's settle that. And of course, the governors are not the best representatives of people who actually suffer police brutality. The governments they live in gilded houses. They're isolated from reality. They live in their own alternative universe. But so let's settle that first. And then second, in my monitoring of the deliberations of the judicial panels of inquiry, I think it's only the Lagos one that I'm intimately familiar with because, of course, it makes it more to the news than the rest. And in fact, the facts that are coming out of that, support the idea that, in fact, people die in Lekki. So and it's tragic that other states, refuse to take advantage of this opportunity to dig into what actually did happen. The grounds of the youth and how to address them, and that they just came together to do this when the deadline for submitting their reports, approached. It, of course, signals the fact that these people are not interested in resolving this problem. One, it also shows that they are not invested in the future of the youth, and of course, are insensitive to the angst that animates young people to revolt. But to make progress, we need to resolve the anguish that animates the frustrations of young people, that makes them go out and fight and protest. We do not want to create a situation where we have a huge repertoire of people who have nothing to lose. That's a very important point. When you create people, a mass of people who have nothing to lose, or who feel that they have nothing to lose, or that they need to die to save others. Very dangerous situation. And I hope we don't get to that point. But sadly, we have a ruling class that is suicidal in its incompetence, that thinks that things will always resolve themselves and that they're always going to be gilded. They're always going to be isolated from the pains that live in society. For as long as they secure the futures of themselves and their wives and kids, other people can go to hell. That's a very terrible mindset to have. Even capitalism itself as a system, very early in life of the progress of capitalism, they realized that they cannot continue to have the sort of laissez-faire capitalism that had existed for a very long time. That's why the welfare state came into being in the West. The welfare state basically is a repudiation of capitalism. You cannot have the forces of demand and supply, all the invisible hand regulating the economies. It basically says people who are unemployed deserve unemployment benefits. People who have lost their job deserve to have some sort of cushion from the government. That is not consistent with the core principles of capitalism. So every system that needs to protect itself, it needs to be sensitive to the lower classes in society, to people who are aggrieved, to people who have systemic problems with the country. And I don't see that happening. There's a lot of insouciance, a lot of carelessness on the part of the ruling elite. And they are shocked when there's this eruption of violence that convulses the very foundations of the country. In 2012, when the Occupy Nigeria protests happened and labor movements were conscripted to neutralize the anger of the people, I warned that this was just a dress rehearsal for something bigger. Because when people protested during the Occupy movement, it wasn't just the increase in food prices that they were worried about. it was also the dysfunctions in the society, the lack of hope and opportunities for young people. And people didn't realize that. They just used that moment as a crutch, as a psychological crutch to articulate their grievances. And so when NSARS happened and the labor movement was completely systematically excluded, it was consistent with what I had predicted. It wasn't that I had any oracular powers. It was just that I knew all over the world, wherever people are dissatisfied, wherever people are systematically excluded, wherever the ruling elite is insensitive to the aspirations of people who constitute the future of the country, you have a huge problem on your hand, and it's going to explode at some point. And to say that is not to wish that the country disintegrates or that it's caught up in conflagration. No, it's to state the reality. And I hope that we get to a point where people who are really sensitive, people who have studied societies and know how societies rise and fall and collapse and rejuvenate, can come together and really address the problems that confront our young people. Because frankly, we have not had a smarter population of young people in the history of Nigeria than we have right now. We that belong to the older generation like to talk about how these young people are disaffiliated from what's happening in society. They're lazy. They just want to watch BB Nigeria. No, that's what is called strategic ignorance. And economists call it rational ignorance, because Nigeria is a source of emotional pain for them. And one of the ways to cope is to disassociate from it. It's not that they're stupid. A lot of them have skills that we have never had in this country. I live in the United States, but when I relate with Nigeria, young Nigerians at home, I'm amazed by the talent that they have. A lot of them are excellent coders. This is what people pay a lot of money to acquire here in advanced countries. These young people are self-taught. And I wanted to build a website for a business my wife and I set up. And there's an app where you go and just look for people who build a business for you for a small fraction of what you normally be charged in the United States here. And so we went there, saw a lot of Pakistanis and Indians, but I was struck by Nigerian names there. And of course, they were the charge considerably lower. And these are people who are dealing with epileptic power supply. They were never taught the skills that they have for which they are making money. They learn on their own. And so out of patriotism, my wife had chosen a Pakistani who was doing a fairly good job, but I said, no, I'm not going to give my money to a Pakistani when there's a Nigerian. But she said, do you trust these Nigerians? What if they run away with our money? And I said, no. For them to be in this app, because it's trust, they would do well. And one of them built an excellent website for our business. And I was having a conversation, where did you learn these skills? He said, I'm self-taught. And there are several of them like that.
I think the beauty of Nigeria is that we're a country of diamonds. And you are one of those diamonds doing well internationally. And we hope that we will learn some lessons from the resilience of Nigerian youths going forward. I'd like to thank you very much, Professor Farooq Kperogi, for joining us and for always honoring our invitation. Thank you very much indeed.